Imagine you're invited to a banquet, a dinner party, and it's at a local leader's home. He's kind of a big deal, and somehow you got on the list. It's exclusive. Not many people are coming. It's a black tie affair, so you're freaking out. You're stressing out. Do I have the right look? But also, you start overthinking things like, how do you properly hold a knife and a fork? Because you don't want to look like the dummy that's invited to this party. And you're all there because of this kind of exciting future leader that is kind of coming up in the ranks. He's an outsider in many ways of the normal political sphere, but he is going to be there. He's the guest of honor, and he's going to give a speech. He's going to share a little of his vision for the future, and only this exclusive group of people are invited, and you're one of them. You're excited. It's a great meal. The food is delicious. And it's coming time where this guest of honor is going to give a speech. When you kind of notice that the doorbell rang and kind of stuck out, but not a big deal until you saw the person that came through the door. This lady walks in, and you can clearly tell immediately that she works nights, and she works on the streets, which would not be a legal activity. She's dressed completely inappropriate in any setting that involves any other people, because this is not the right attire. And she walks into this environment, and she goes to the guest of honor, and she embraces him. So you're like, man, this is so uncomfortable and awkward for him. And she starts weeping and crying, and it's ugly crying. It's mascara running down her face crying. And you're like, how is he going to get out of this, right? Is he going to just push her away? Is he going to stand up? Is he going to be sly about it, but somehow get out of this? When all of a sudden, you start noticing people's jaws are just fully open. The filet mignon is falling out of their mouth back on the plate, as he doesn't do any of that, but instead, he embraces her back. You're like, there goes every political plan that he ever had. In this moment, it's gone. He lost everything. Everything's gone in this moment. And you're just in awe of what's happening, as he kind of just is so gracious and loving back to this lady. And you're not sure if they know each other. You're so confused in this moment. This story we can find in Luke chapter 7. If you have your Bible, open up Luke chapter 7. We're going to look at verse 36. If you don't have a Bible, you'd like to read from a physical Bible, we might be able to get one to you. And we have some Bibles here. We'd love to give you one to keep. But Luke chapter 7, verse 36 is where we're going to look. And we're in a conversation we've been in for a few weeks, and we're going to continue for a few more weeks, all around this idea. In the Gospel of Luke, it appears that the ministry of Jesus, it always seems as if he is either going to a meal, he's sitting at a meal, or he's coming from a meal. He's doing so much ministry just around tables. And here is another setting. And let me just read this to you, that you'd be entered into this story. It says in verse 36, chapter 7, it says, one of the Pharisees asked Jesus to have dinner with him. We'll find out a little later this Pharisee's name is Simon. It appears Simon, a Pharisee, doesn't hate Jesus like many other Pharisees. He's probably more confused about this guy. He's intrigued. He's interested. He has Jesus over for dinner. And so Jesus went to his home and sat down to eat. Verse 37, when a certain immoral woman from the city heard he was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. Then she knelt down behind him at his feet, weeping. Her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them off with her hair. Then she kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited Jesus over, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She's a sinner. We're brought into this moment. Jesus is invited to dinner. Back then, how this would look is he would go over to the home, and often in that culture at that time, Greco-Roman kind of style would be you would eat dinner together, and that would always be followed by like an extended discussion. You would talk philosophy or religion even, or maybe politics, whatever it might be, and it's a great conversation, but everyone would remain there. You wouldn't eat and run, but you would eat and then have a lot of dialogue. In that culture at that time, dining rooms were not like how you and I have dining rooms where they're kind of secluded and in their own space, but they would actually be kind of almost connected to the outside. It would be like indoor-outdoor environment, and it would be close to actually, if you will, the like sidewalks or the streets where actually people could come and they could see the people that are there discussing and eating together. But not only that, they could sometimes even participate in the conversation that's being had. It would also be a place where any leftovers that were remaining would be able to be given to any of the poor that would be kind of standing on the sides waiting for any leftovers to be given to them. This would all happen. They would sit at a table, not like what we sit at today, but tables that are much lower with pillows around three sides. They would actually often lay down at this and eat. Some of you are like, that sounds really nice. And they would have three sides where people would sit. The fourth would be where servers would come and bring the different food. They would have bread and wine at the table before and after the meal. As people have dialogue, they would enjoy this. It would be like our today chips and salsa, and they would have dialogue. And this is how this would look. Everyone that walks by could see the people there at this dinner having this discussion. Jesus is there. He's at a Pharisee's home. And for the Pharisees, you have to understand, they guarded their purity with such like a rule and strategic that coming into contact with sinners would be a bad move on their part. They knew that it almost in a sense, a woman, especially like her, that is known in the text, Luke says immoral woman or a sinner. What he's not saying is that she is special in some way of like, what Luke will say throughout Scripture is we are all sinners fallen short of God's glory. What he's getting to is actually society-wise, she's also viewed even bad in society's eyes. And we're brought into this where we're at a Pharisee's home, and he would guard his purity so much that when this woman came in, it would be a shock to his system. It would be almost like contamination. You can't come within distance of this person. So when she goes to Jesus and she acts in this way, and Jesus' response is not how the Pharisee would ever imagine. He even says, like, if this man even knew, like, he would not associate with this person. And you got to understand, even more so in their culture at that time, it's even crazier, because when she would cry at his feet and then wipe her hair, his feet with her hair to like dry, like this alone is strange, maybe even today. But you got to understand, for them, her hair would be put up and likely even covered. Her hair coming down, letting it down would be, in their culture at that time, that's what you do only in the bedroom. That would be like showing up nude all of a sudden to a setting like this. Everything about her is wrong in their eyes. And then Jesus' response is so counterculture to how Simon and many others would respond. Jesus is willing to like link his identity with her. And this connects, like, Jesus is willing to link his identity with you and with me, the sinners that we are, the ones that have acted in different ways, and Jesus still is willing to link his identity with us. But this text then connects even deeper, because sometimes we can look at a verse or a section of Scripture, and we can look at what does this mean, like, in this text, right? And that's good. And we can sometimes we can go maybe a little too extreme, but we can also look at text and be like, who am I in this? Like, what one am I? And we try to find ourselves, we're all David in this story. Like, we that's what we want. But then sometimes we also need to do the work of like, the beauty of the Scripture is that you can continue to see how it references each other, it interlaces with each other. So then if we were, just for a moment, you don't have to jump there, it'll show up on the screen, I believe, but Deuteronomy chapter 21, Deuteronomy chapter 21, Old Testament, comes with like old law, old covenant, different rules and rituals at that time. And if you remember when we first started this conversation, it was all around this idea that when Jesus says that the Son of Man would come, he explains it in this way. The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost, right? He says the Son of Man came to be a ransom for many, to pay like our debts. Those are the whys. But then we're also told this how, and this is really the crux and the catalyst for this conversation we're in. Jesus says the Son of Man came eating and drinking. He shares how he came to do ministry in this way. And then we start to see it where he sits with different people, the Pharisees, and also the tax collectors and notorious sinners and all this. But when he says this, he says the Son of Man came eating and drinking. And then his next statement was, and you called him a glutton and a drunkard. And this even then goes back to Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, we kind of enter into this moment where we're kind of told, like, how do you deal with different problems? This one's, how do you deal with like a rebellious son? He goes and does his own thing, and it says this: the parents must say, in verse 20, the parents must say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious and refuses to obey. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of this town must come, stone him to death. In this way you will purge the evil from among you, and all Israel will hear about it and be afraid. And for some of us, we're like, what is happening? That seems a little extreme. Have you ever heard of rehab or something of that nature? He continues and he says in verse 22, if someone has committed a crime worthy of death and is executed and hung on a tree, the body must not remain hanging from the tree overnight. You must bury the body the same day, for anyone who is hung is cursed in the sight of God. And the reason I bring this text up is because when we're introduced to Jesus and he says, I am the Son of Man. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. You call him a glutton and a drunkard. And then he continues, and we see the ministry of Jesus, and it ends up where he will be persecuted, hated, and he will be executed and hung on a tree. And what we see in Deuteronomy is prophetically speaking, I believe, about a moment where Jesus comes. That some of you might call him a glutton and a drunkard, the rebellious son. See, Jesus, we know this, he is not the rebellious son, but he will take the place of a rebellious son and a rebellious daughter. He will take your place, he will take my place. And then we are told that he would hang on a tree, and the sin, the curse of the world would rest upon him, that he would take that for us. And it's in this moment then that I come back to the setting. Jesus is there, sitting at a table with the Pharisee Simon and many of his friends likely. And then also there's this woman that kind of made her way into the dinner party that did not belong. And she would be a notorious sinner. And she would be there as well. And I believe Jesus in this moment is showing a picture of who he came for. He came for this woman. And he will begin to talk about that, but also he's going to be speaking to a Simon who seems to be lost in a different way. This all is happening, and for many of us, if we were in the shoes of Simon, likely we would probably think or respond similar. We see this setting, Jesus is there, and this woman comes up, and it almost seems like inappropriate behavior at this dinner. But then Jesus, he kind of sees what's going on, and the interesting, if you read the text, like Simon, he thinks something, and Jesus responds to his thoughts, which already has got to be a shock, right? And Jesus, he begins to talk to Simon about something, because he's seeing this disconnect, this issue between these two individuals, the woman and Simon. So he begins to talk to Simon, and he begins to kind of like set up this scenario. And he sees the issue that Simon has. So when he first talks to Simon about this, he kind of calls him out on some stuff. See, in their time, in that culture, a little different than today in many ways, but like when you would go over to someone's home, you were a guest, and they would host you, and there would be certain things that we would do even today. You might try to keep your home clean. Like, I don't know. You might invite them over. You might have some food ready for them, whatever it might be. In their day, they're living and walking on dirt roads. So they wore sandals. So the first thing you would do is you would offer like a bowl of water to clean your feet. If you were really like uppity, then you would also have a servant that would do the cleaning. They would wash the feet for the person. Like this would be the setting. You would kind of like greet it like with even a loving kiss, not in the way that we think, but like this kind of welcoming. But then also you might even anoint their head with oil as like this, like, man, just this kind of like, welcome to my home. I hope you're blessed, like all this kind of stuff. And Jesus, he kind of first calls Simon out in this. And he kind of says that, he says, Jesus turns to the woman. So he's looking at the woman, and then he speaks to Simon. And he says, look at this woman kneeling here. See, and he says, when I entered your home, you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet. And he says, but she has washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. He says, you didn't greet me with a kiss, but from the time I first came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. He says, you neglected the courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she has anointed my feet with a rare perfume. He's starting to show Simon something, and he's almost first pointing out, like, who's the real host here? You welcome me into your home, but she's the one that has done all the recognition of me as the guest of honor. But it really makes sense when you look at the first verses before it. See, Simon is assuming, why would Jesus even like kind of associate with this woman? So he's questioning everything that Jesus is doing in this moment. And Jesus, he knows the thoughts of Simon, and he responds and he asks Simon this question. He says, verse 40, then Jesus answered his thoughts, and he says, Simon, he said to the Pharisee, I have something to say to you. And Simon replies, go ahead, teacher. Then Jesus told him this story. So a man loans money to two people. One, 500 pieces of silver, to the other, 50 pieces. But neither of them could repay him. So he kindly forgave them, canceling their debts. So both of their debt canceled, zeroed out. For some of us today, you could just imagine, you know that debt you have zeroed out. And then he says, who do you think is going to be like more thankful? Like who's going to respond in a more like kind of astonished or worshipful, if you will, way? And Simon answers it right, and he says, obviously probably the one with more debt. And Jesus says, correct. And then Jesus says this part where he says, I came to your home, you didn't do anything, she's done everything. Like, and he's starting to point to Simon, hey, I came and I want to deal with a heart issue. Because you look on the outside and he will even say, this woman, her sins are many. Jesus is not like disregarding her life that she has lived, but he's also saying a debt will be paid, that her response makes sense. And Simon, you're at a place today where you think your life looks good and you feel like you kind of got everything in order, and you're almost getting to a place now where it's not who do you say Jesus is as much as it's who do you see yourself as. Because you're at a place where you think that you almost are not in need of the grace of God. Like your life looks okay and everyone else might look up to you because you're doing pretty good things society-wise. But at the end of the day, if you don't respond to the amazing grace of God in your life, you will always come up lacking. That debt will never be paid if you don't recognize it. He's speaking to Simon and he's kind of showing him, this woman has had a rough life. She hasn't done all the right things. That's not the point now. The point is she recognizes this debt, this grace, and her response is clear. That she is acting in such a way that seems astonishing to society, to this group, this dinner party, because of how she is responding in this moment. It might seem crazy, but she is recognizing the crazy grace that has been given to her, and she responds in this way. And it's this picture that I look at and I go, like there's part of that I think Jesus is trying to bring these two worlds together. This Pharisee Simon and this woman from the streets and everyone in the middle to this table. And that all of us would begin to see there's something deeper at play in our life. There's something of the grace and the work of Jesus that happens in us. And it gets to, for some of us, maybe you've had a hard life. And maybe you still carry some of the weight of that and the doubt of that, and you question even, like, can God still use me, or does he really love me? Like, you're still even challenged by that. There's that group. But then there's this other group that maybe you once kind of like realized this amazing grace, but over the course of years of following Jesus, you got to a place now where you kind of just rely on yourself, and you're a pretty good Christian. You categorize yourself, and you find yourself today, like in so many ways, kind of neglecting the work of Christ in our life. We almost kind of are self-reliant over time. And Jesus is looking at these two groups, and he's speaking to them. And it connects with Deuteronomy, where it's like, man, Christ came and paid the rebellious son's debt that you and I could not pay, that we deserve to pay. We are unworthy to have what Christ has given us, but that is why it's called amazing grace. But then he connects it even to this of like, man, and this is then what we will see the church. In Acts, it speaks of the church, and it speaks of how the church would grow and flourish. And it was not by some guy getting on a stage and speaking, as often as what we're told is that they would go to the temple and worship, and then they would go home, and they would have communion, they would eat together, and then it says, and the Lord added to their numbers daily, like people are being saved. All at this setting. And I think that points to a picture for us that many of us have lost, if you will, in the following of Jesus, in our Christian pursuit. We've lost the art of the first century church and how they lived it. Like, statistically, they say 33%, there's been a 33% decrease in families that eat together at all over the last 3 decades. Not only that, but then like a third of that are eating together. They categorize it, but they're watching TV as they're doing it. So you're not really eating with anyone else when you're watching something. They say a 45% decrease in the same amount of time with people entertaining other people. Like, we don't have people over for dinner as much as we used to. We've kind of lost that art as well. The reason I bring that up is because I think that kind of speaks to maybe like a core feature in how Jesus did ministry, and then also how we see the church grow and flourish after that. What I mean is, like, when a few years ago my family, we went down to Mexico, and we got to see the ministry happen in Mexico, and we got to kind of like get a tour, and we got to see all the different things. There was like locations that they would go and feed and clothe people. Like, that's often what we think of missions and all that. But then we are also introduced to these like college kids that when they first met them, they were like in like elementary or junior high, and now they're in college, and like this whole like relational like connection that exists. And we're meeting families, and we're connecting with them, and we meet this one family, and we go to their home, and we get to see the father. He has a brick making business. He makes bricks, he sells bricks, right? He brings his kids into it. They have a little piece of land. It's like on a hillside, and the boys start to get their own like little kind of like area where they can make their own brick and sell their own brick, and like it's a business, a family business. There they also have like a farm, kind of like not a farm like what we think of. It's like connected right to their home pretty much. And we're walking around, they're giving us a tour, we're meeting the family, and I'm seeing different things. I see the chickens, obviously, that's where you get eggs until those chickens don't lay eggs, and then you eat chicken. But they also had pigs, and I'm kind of like just intrigued. They can see it in my face. Like, I'm intrigued how this works out for their family. These boys are high school, maybe a little older now, and they help in the family business, but also they raise these pigs, they feed these pigs, they care for these pigs, but then these pigs one day will feed their family. This is how their life works. This is how they provide for each other. They sell bricks, but when brick selling is not going well, they might need a pig to feed the family. So I'm just intrigued, like, man, you're raising your kids up, and your kids, like, know all of this, and they're kind of like, they help in this life, if you will. And they see the intrigue, so then they tell me, like, hey, one of these pigs is coming due where it needs to feed the family. And they say, but we're not going to do it until you come back down. Like, you have to come back down, and you have to be, like, a part of this. And I'm, like, intrigued, so I'm like, you got it. So we figure it out a few months later. I make the trek back down. We show up at their house, and they inform me, you are going to be the one that will use the knife to take the life of the pig. And I'm like, okay, here we go. Pigs. Yeah, squilling, that's crazy. But so I am there. They are walking me through this. The boys are well younger. They are my kids' age, and they are, like, showing me how to do this. Like, you're just in astonishment. They show me what to do. They give me the knife, and it's the best way to take the life of the pig while not, like, letting the pig suffer. They care about it, right? They've raised this pig. And then they will take that pig, they will put it up on a table, and I just watched as the entire family got to work, right? As they slowly open up the pig. My daughter's there, and she's, like, taking anatomy. She dissected a frog one time, so she's like, whoa, this is different. And all this is happening. The family starts to get to work. The daughter, she takes the intestines, and she will start cleaning the intestines, tripia, right? One is skinning the pig, and they will make chicharron. Like, all this stuff is happening. They take the organs, they put it over here, because they're going to use those later. They take the head of the pig. They're going to keep that. That's going to help feed the family in the future. Everything will go to use. And I'm there just in astonishment. But what I'm asked often, people will ask me, like, if they know that, they'll just kind of ask me about that experience. And honestly, it was crazy. But the most memorable thing is when I sat down with this other family and we ate together. Like, there's something about that. Like, at the end of this dad, he's around my age, but him and I, we don't have much in common. Like, think about it for a second. He makes bricks for a living. He probably did that as a young child. I don't think I've ever made a brick in my life. I might have, like, molded mud together, but that didn't really work very long, right? Like, he had 2 pigs. I have 2 dogs. Not really the same thing. Like, we live in different countries. We don't have a lot in common. But in that moment, these 2 families, we sat down and we shared a meal together. And what a picture for me is, it's just a picture of real community. And the only thing that binded us together is what binds you and I together. We don't have a whole lot of the same experiences. Many of us don't share the same things, the same stories, the same ideas, the same age, whatever it is. But the one thing that binds us together is a life and death experience. The life and the death of Jesus Christ that works in our life. And as I sat there, the most memorable thing I could imagine, because you got to understand, this man and his family, that pig would feed them for a long time. But instead, he invited another family over with 4 kids to sit down and eat with him, to feed us. And in that act, like, was just this perfect example of whatever your experiences and background is. And that's the beauty, I think, of this church, is for so many of us, you and I, we might have different opinions on a lot of things. And in a culture today where it's like, if you vote a certain way or think a certain way, then we divide at that point. But we will still say, you know what? There's something that binds us deeper than any of those things. And it's the work of Jesus in our life. And I think this picture for Jesus in this moment is a moment where he's connecting these 2. And as he shares this story to Simon and he asks these questions, you just got to imagine, like, for Simon, he's going, her and I are not at all in the same park here. Like, why would you connect how I hosted you and how she's treating you in this moment? We are not at the same level playing field. Simon would sit there with his pridefulness of looking at it going, I've lived my life better than her. And on the books, sure. But Jesus says there's something deeper that binds you together. And you need to see that. And the reason this conversation of tables and this whole idea, it comes to this point for us of saying, at the end of the day, if we treat church like an hour a week or every other week or whatever it might be, I think we're missing a deeper picture of what Jesus did in his ministry. And even how the church kind of flourished in its time. Where people with all different backgrounds and different ideas can gather at a table together. You know, this last season, I've had my group, and we have other groups. It's not a plug just to get in a group, because I would say it's a call. I think this is how you experience life in a greater way. But our group has been a blessing to us, and we've seen the benefit of that this last season, where it's just been different. There's been something different about it, and partially because we're not going like, hey, what'd you think about the sermon? And I'm sitting there like, what'd you think? Like, this is weird. But we gather, and there's then questions that arise. Hey, where are you guys at? Like, if you had to put it on a kind of a 1 to 10 on your spiritual walk, or this, or hey, what is the biggest like doubt or question that you may have, or a friend that you may have regard to Christianity? And then let dialogue happen. And over the course of time, what we saw is these people there's relationships that are built. And it's not just relationships so you have some new friends so you can add on your Instagram numbers. But it's friendships that then like do life together. Like this last night we had one of our group, they got married. And what an amazing thing. The first time I met her name's Jasmine, was literally when she was here, her first Sunday, I believe, and she got baptized. Like that. But now I know her, and I was able to go and celebrate her wedding with Eric. Eric is a guy, awesome guy, and I've got to know him more and more, and this two, they just got married. I've been married for a while now. I have 4 kids. One of them is almost their age. Like, we don't share a lot of the same kind of story in life. They're not here because they just got married. But then I have a Robert here. Robert, I met in October, a year ago, roughly. Like, and you can make your way up here, man. I know you feel uncomfortable, but Robert has a different background than I. My dad was a pastor. Your dad is a pastor. So that sounds familiar, but his upbringing was one of, bounced around from home to home. His dad has an amazing testimony that God has used him. He's a pastor now, but he once had addiction problems, different things, and he grew up in some dysfunction maybe, and all that kind of stuff, and now he's a father of 2, has an amazing wife, and God has used in amazing ways, but him and I, we don't have a ton in common other than maybe some of the things that bind us together today. But then you have like a Sarah. Sarah led us in worship today. Sarah is like, what are you, 22? 22. My son is 21, I think. Like, did I get that right? My son is here. But like, Sarah got married a year and a half ago. And Sarah has her husband serving right now. He spent some of his time as he was raised in a different country. He had some dysfunction in his family. He was raised by, I believe, different people in his home, not just mother and father and all this. And he had to walk through that, and he became the man he is today, where he's now like 2 weeks into the academy. He's getting like yelled at every day because that's how it works. But he is providing a future. He's figuring out what his career path will be. And this couple's at my table. And then we have others. We have different people that I get to gather with all the time. We have people that will sit at this table. We have kind of like our group, just like in Scripture, it speaks of how the numbers grew, right? They gathered together, they took communion together, and then the Lord added to their numbers. And we've seen that where we're about to split our group, and I'm going to send off a lot of the younger people because they don't find me relevant in any way. Like Josh and Jaden joined our group, and I'm like, they're kind of family now, so it's not now like they always were, but like they need to be in a group where they don't have to worry about like dads in the picture, right? Like they need to have their own. So this group, like some of them are going to split and they're going to become their own. And for many of us, it's like this setting right here is where we shared life. Sarah, some of the guys in our group, Sarah and Nathan moved, and they helped them move, right? And like Sarah, I remember Sarah telling me like that. She didn't like even know them very well yet. Like just getting to know each other. And Like she was just floored by this kind of just reaction of these people caring enough to take time out of their day to help her and Nathan move. But then we have others. We have, now it's like every birthday party, we're all gathering together, celebrating. It's where life happens. Robert and I, we went golfing, and we got to talk a lot more than probably ever before as we were on the drive and all these different things. And it's now relationships where if there's a need, I know who I'm calling. It's my group. It's the different people in my group. It's the people that we don't have the same stories in our walk with Christ and when we came to know Christ and in our upbringing, in our views of society or different things. Like some of those can be varied, but the work of Christ in our life is what binded us together. And my challenge and encouragement to you guys is in the same way, like this is I think what we're all called to. And too many of us are disconnecting and if you will, Simon, like segregating from groups of people. And we only want to find those that we can find a clique with. And that was never the picture of the church. The picture of the church was a bunch of dysfunctional people from all sorts. Like, it was a Roman guard. It was also like a Jewish teacher of the law. And these people came together and they made the church. And for you and I, it can be guys at 60 and it can be guys at 20, and they can find connection and they can celebrate what the Lord is doing in their life, and there can be mentoring and disciple, all that kind of stuff, but it happens not in a service like it happens around a table. My encouragement and my challenge to you is, one, maybe you need to find a community like that. And we have them here, and I would love to help you find that because I think it changes your spiritual journey. But also, my encouragement to you is also, I believe there's a lady or a man that can represent that woman that would walk into that setting that feels like she's so outcast and doesn't belong, and that God has placed you around. There's that person in your life, a family member, a friend, a coworker, a neighbor, whatever it might be, that feels so disconnected from Christianity and so disconnected from almost being accepted into the church. They feel like maybe they're not allowed or they don't feel and maybe God is calling you to be a picture of hope for them and reconciliation. That maybe it starts with just a meeting at a table and having them over for dinner. Some of the things that we're doing here as a church we've invested in is the courtyard out front. We have the playground and the tables outside. Because what we want to say is also we want to create places where, hey, parents can gather and the kids can play and maybe you can connect with someone else. We're also working on a coffee shop where you can get something to eat and a cup of coffee, and maybe you can connect with someone and have real conversations that people can start to see this amazing unity and the work of Christ. If you ever read the epistles, the letters to the church, what you always see is that they're always called to unity. And maybe that's a life that you and I are meant to live as well. One that we're connected, binded together, not by our own works and our own accomplishments and our own agreements in life, but because of the work and the life and the death of Jesus Christ that binds us and unites us together through the work of the Holy Spirit in each of us. That's my encouragement to you. Don't go living out church while never gathering at tables with other people.